Welcome to What Grows. It's a podcast where we play with the connection between who we are and how we grow. I'm your host, Noella Moshi. So, Keisha, we met when I was figuring out how to be a first time mom, and you were navigating life with your new twins, very gracefully, I might add. And what I admire most about you is your presence, which is steady and kind and thoughtful. You're a social worker focusing on intergenerational trauma, child protection, and racial oppression, but right now you're fully immersed in motherhood. I know you bring lots of wisdom from this journey and everything you've learned along the way, so welcome. Well, I have just a warm up question, which is if you could give your life a title, like it was a book, what would that title be?
Um, I if I was to give my life a title, I think it would be um, "You owe it to yourself to get to the other side." Someone said that to me once, a good friend, and it's just something that kind of sticks in my mind all the time. You owe it to yourself to get to the other side.
Hmm. Yeah, so maybe it's a feeling. Like the other side is a sense of I feel grounded in where I am now. I feel like I'm not stretching and striving and stressing and pushing, at least for now, because I'm at the other side. What do you think? Could it be a sense as opposed to like a on paper destination?
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't think it's a destination. I think I owe it to myself not to be stuck where I am. So if I'm
Mhm.
comfortable where I am, I don't need to move. But in the
Mhm.
spaces where I'm not comfortable, that's where I owe it to myself to get to the other side.
Yes. I think of just yourself, owing to yourself for me is like, all right, that means I'm treating myself with respect. I am saying that I am worthy of like making commitments too. I owe it to myself in that sense. I think there's something about how we treat ourselves as well in that title of your book. What have you learned about how to treat yourself?
I guess for me, yeah, choosing yourself is really thinking about like, yeah, how you can show yourself love. And I guess a lot of us are good at giving other people advice. So how would I give that advice to someone else I love and then apply that to myself? So yeah, definitely lots
Mhm.
of grace.
I'm in this course at the moment where they pair you up with someone, and literally for 5 minutes every day, we video call each other and listen to the other person saying what is their thought, what is their emotion, and what is like the physical sensation in their body. And you're not allowed to give them advice. And it's been so magical, so powerful for me because you just grow to love and appreciate this other person, and all of the advice that I want to give her, but I'm not allowed to, I end
Yeah.
up giving to myself. And
Yes.
so she's giving herself advice on my behalf, and I'm doing the same thing, and we're both growing. And it's just been really nice. But I want to. I mean, there's so much, Keish, that I want to talk with you about. I'm curious about transgenerational trauma and your work there. I am very interested in family dynamics because that's something when I moved to the US also I navigated, but being Tanzanian, I know what my people are like and there's family dynamics there that I am also navigating, so interested in that. And then I also still want to just kind of go into how you are changing and growing every month with your sons. I'm sure is like a process of remembering what you owe to yourself, even as you owe something to them and to your husband and to your. So, I mean, we could go in so many different ways, but maybe let me just start with, um, can you tell me about a time when you realized I need to pause and think about what I owe to myself?
I will say that I am a Londoner. I am We move with a lot of speed. I come from generations of lots of trauma, so we move with lots of anxiety. And so the idea of having like the pause and reflect isn't something that comes very natural to me. And so what I find is that in day to day life, I whenever I pause and reflect, it's usually because I've been paused. And so I
Mm,
would think to myself, a moment where I had to lean into being paused, and think, what is it that I need for myself? Is I guess when I came to Tanzania, and when I first came to Tanzania, I came in quite a haste because I came in 2020. And I had planned to get married in the July of 2020, but then in the March of 2020, I got a spiritual urge to just leave the UK. So I believed that I was being told to just like leave immediately. So I left my job, which is something that I'd never done. So I left my job without giving any notice, and I came to Tanzania to essentially to marry my husband, but it was just a little bit earlier than what we had planned. And so when I came to Tanzania, in the UK, I had, two jobs. I've always been, quite busy, if you like. And I guess, obviously in 2020, the world kind of stopped, paused, and reflected. And for me, I came with about 100 ideas, 100 projects, 100 things that I was going to do. Um, and then I came across multiple obstacles, visa obstacles, and, this doesn't quite translate. And actually, all of those kind of obstacles. And so at first I was just kind of bashing against them, and I was like, um, I'll make this work. And then I guess there was a point where I was like, I really just need to pause and reflect and see what the deeper thing I need is in this, because I have such a and to be fair, I'm saying it as if I wasn't doing things. So at that time, I was doing multiple things. Like I was running workshops for governmental organisations in the UK. I was doing talks. So it's not like I was just trying to do things. I was actually like doing a lot of different things. But I found, none of it felt like it was sticky. None of it felt purposeful. All of it felt like I'm pushing to do this. And so I'm like, what is this about me? Why I'm forcing all of these things to happen. And I guess a pause and reflect for me was like, I didn't really want to go out, because I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing with my life, and I don't really want to talk to people or meet people in this space of really not knowing what's going on. And I had to pause and reflect and think, what is it that I need? And it was that I needed to slow down. I needed to kind of face some of the things that make me move really fast. I mean, I started by saying I'm from London and it's a fast paced city, but actually, I wasn't in London. And Tanzania is slow, it moves slow. So I didn't have to move at that fast pace anymore. So it was, it didn't have anything to do with the context of where I was in. So why do I need to, continue to be busy? So I guess, in that time, it was like, I owe it to myself, or what I need is to, address things that are uncomfortable for me. Yeah, and just all of those kind of things, and also think about my relationship with work, and what that really means to me, and like where do I find my identity, and who am I outside of all of the things that have ever existed before I came here, and so I owed it to myself at that time to just slow down, to just stop everything, and just to see and sit with that discomfort.
yes. And what you said about just kind of trying to be busy and trying to kind of make things work because that's who you used to think you were. And then
Mm,
just pausing and being like, but is this who I am now? And is this who I want to be? I think
right.
is a big thing. And I'm really trying to sense in my body which parts of this work are life giving versus which parts am I doing because I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Right.
And
Exactly.
and yeah, I think it's kind of being daily open to does this feel right as opportunities come up? Does this make sense? And sometimes we have to take opportunities because you need you need the income, but then how are you showing up in that space? How much of it are you making into who you are versus just this is something that I'm doing and I'm doing to the best of my ability, you know?
Exactly. And sometimes you don't need the income. So I guess it's interesting for me when it's like, you actually don't need it because you've been without it for such a long time, but you still feel like you should be doing that, and just how deeply that should feels. Like when I first came here, I said it's like I've got an internal slave master, like just telling me like you just need to be out working, 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 and it. I mean, it took me about 4 years to change that relationship with that. You should be, you should be, you should be, because it was so. I mean, that too is generational, but it was so loud, and it was so, um, when it became conscious, because it was, always unconscious, because I was always working. When it became conscious, it was like, wow, you know, you really have a big influence over what I'm doing with my day to day.
Yeah. I mean, I I want to go back to what you said about anxiety and that kind of coming in from I don't know if you phrased it as like from generations who've had to kind of move. But
Mm.
it's relatable to me. My parents, were born in Tanzania and then left, and we were immigrants and we moved around. And now I don't live in my home country. And there's something linking for me my shoulds to my anxiety. Like, should for me is like I want to shape the world into what it currently is not. And until it fits what I think it needs to be, the world and
Mm.
myself, I am going to be unhappy. And
Yeah.
I've been doing this work. This woman called Byron Katie, she calls her like these worksheets the work, and really the goal is to try and understand where it is that I'm not accepting reality, and that's
Right.
the source of my suffering.
Yes. Interesting.
So I want to tie it back to, um, well, first of all, I don't know very much about transgenerational trauma. So I'm wondering if first you could explain that to me. And the reason that I'm interested in it is because I do feel like every family carries some level of it. Some folks have a lot more of it than others do. I wouldn't call this trauma, but I do want to share a story, which is that I took my 2-year-old to the dentist a few days ago, and my mom has had kind of gum and tooth problems her whole life. It's been really bad, and probably because of some neglect there from the people who are parenting her. I've had far less problems with my teeth, but I still pretty problematic compared to my husband and my husband's family. And now my daughter is going to the dentist at 2 years old. And I believe for her that she's going to have healthy, happy teeth for her whole life, and that I get to be that person that my mom pushed by brushing my teeth and by taking care of me, and I'm pushing by taking my daughter to the dentist, and she'll do the same for her child. And we broke something. I was like crying before we went to the dentist. I was so happy, and obviously no one could understand that, but I felt like I really did something there. And so there's just, I mean, I think there's transgenerational trauma, and then there's recognition of that, and then there's opportunity within that recognition.
I love that example because it's also, yeah, it's a healing. I mean, when we think about this stuff, and I think one of the things over the last couple of years that I've been trying to come away from, although it's very important, is being so focused on the trauma so that I can move to being so focused on the healing. And I know that for a lot of people, that comes hand in hand. But what I find, especially in my work as like a social worker and in those kind of fields where you're working with people with a lot of trauma, um, or even they may not have a lot of trauma, but you're working because there is a trauma that's coming up, and so the focus of your work is the trauma. So it may not be that they have a lot of trauma, but you're focused on the trauma. So whatever you focus on really grows, right? So um, And a lot of the time we can be so focused on the issue that it can, as I just said, the issue just gets bigger and bigger, and actually we miss those, sometimes with us small opportunities to just heal. And so for someone, like, I've got a godmother who had terrible teeth, which stemmed from childhood neglect. She was in foster care, and it's just something that's been a real source of shame, which meant that she wouldn't go out. When she would talk, she would cover her mouth. It really impacted her life. So I know it's like sometimes things don't really feel traumatic to people. And a lot of times when people tell their story, because we know that people can sometimes have a way of diminishing how we feel. And even when you said at the beginning of this, like, I sit and I like see how this is making me feel rather than, like, talking about it. Most people don't even know how they're feeling because they're so cut off from their emotions. And
Mm.
so, you know, that can be something that's really traumatic. And so when you have that opportunity to heal, and it could be something as simple as, we brush our teeth 2 times a day, and now my child doesn't have that, and there's not going to be so many stories or connotation with teeth for my child. In fact, she may grow up and think that, having healthy, beautiful, dancing, great, white, sparkly white teeth is just normal, and nothing, and doesn't have a relationship with teeth at all. And I really love when I hear things like that. For me, when I think about transgenerational trauma, I'm usually thinking of the Black experience. And, in my work that, can look different. When I was a social worker, I wasn't just working with Black families. But really what I find when I'm talking about transgenerational or intergenerational trauma is something that isn't healed and continues to show up in the family line. So when I was working in social work, one of the things we would do is we would do something called genograms. Do you know genograms, Noella?
No, tell me.
Okay, so genograms are essentially like family trees, and you go up 3 generations or more. So you'll start with, any children who are there, their parents, their grandparents, and if you can, the great grandparents. And you put all of these lines, and the lines kind of reflect kind of relationships with each other. So you kind of write things out: are people married? Are they separated? Was there migration? Was there violence, substance misuse, any kind of pattern? And you kind of also like culture, like where are people from? Is the genogram all the same? When I say color, I don't mean as in like black, white. I mean like as in like maybe everyone's from Somalia, for example, and so you've used blue as the color code for Somalia, and the whole genogram is blue, or is it filled with all different colors of the rainbow? And so you just kind of look at like patterns that are happening um, intergenerationally. So it might be that there is maybe lots of separations, or there could be, a few people who have substance misuse, or everybody's migrated. Another thing you do on genograms is how close relationships are. So it could be that, there's been lots of movement. So now maybe mum and child are not close because they live in completely two different geographical areas, and they're not close to grandparents, and so there's lots of, and we use that genogram as a tool to ask questions. So it'll be like, hmm, who, we'll ask. So we don't know who people are close to. We'll always ask, like, who's close to who here? What are relationships like? Do these people know each other and stuff? And in that, people can they kind of become reflexive. So they start to think about their own kind of relationship to their own kind of patterns in their family, um and they may start to uncover things like, okay, like, actually around this age people tended to leave the country or leave their parents' house or leave their, and so, we were talking about shoulds earlier. So some people might have this thing like, everyone at my house, we kind of, have been, kicked out of our house at 20. And, now they've got a 20-year-old child, and now they're having, issues with that 20-year-old. And, that's one of the options that are on the table. And so, but they don't want to do it because of, they know how it impacted them. So I guess when I think about intergenerational trauma, that was a really long way about going going to it. It's just about things that um haven't been healed, that show up in different generations. So it could be like great grandma, had an issue with alcohol, and now we're seeing great grandson with an issue of alcohol. And is that connected? Is it not connected? Um, so how trauma kind of comes down, um, yeah, to different family members.
Mm.
Yes. And then a large part of like the stuff that I'm interested in is what Dr. Joy Degree calls post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is like the things that have happened during slavery that still impact Black people until now. And
Mm.
I find that a really important piece of work. So yeah.
Can you tell
Uh,
me more about post-traumatic slave syndrome? What does that look like?
so the most interesting example um, that I will give, because it's so memorable to me, is like if we were to go back to slavery. So this is all Joy Degree's kind of the things that she speaks about, but she speaks about like in when um, when Africans were enslaved. Um, One of the things that, of course, they would want to do was protect their children. And so, um, what you would have is slave masters looking at different children, being like, "Oh, that one's strong. That one's like this," and then the parent will say, "No, no, 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 he's not strong. Oh, that child's so clumsy. That child's like this. That child's so like that."
Mm.
And what you can find in the I mean, she essentially does work with a lot of African Americans. So what her research showed was that what you would find is that even now, um, a white mother might be in the bank talking about how great her child is, great at this and great at that and great at this, and actually, if you look at an African American mum, she's not saying that. This one, he's got too much energy. This one's got. And what is that? How has that come about? That actually there's such a playing down of the abilities of of their children, when actually their child might be like a mathematician or a genius in this and a genius in that. But actually the trend is to be like, oh yeah, Jamal is just, so talkative, when, you know,
Mm.
someone else might be like, my child is so articulate and so like this and so like that. And so the things that kind of come down as a result of such a harsh experience that, a demographic of people experience for such a long amount of time, such an endured amount of time. And so, yeah, so she speaks about that, and just kind of like, obviously when slavery ended, it wasn't like, oh, okay, now slavery's ended. It was such a terrible thing. And, what we really want to do is recompensate and, think about all of this harm that was done, the harm that was done when people were removed from their land, the harm that was done when, people had been physically and sexually abused for all of that different harm. There was no um, therapeutic input, there was no restoration, there was no anything. And actually, the conditions were still quite hard: racism, not being able to get, certain jobs, and, in America, redlining, and all of these different things. And so it's like, how does one adapt to all of those kind of things? And how much of that adapting do people now call culture, when actually it really
Mm.
came from a really traumatic period and a traumatic experience. Like, even if you think about things like hip hop, for example, and certain genres where someone's talking about killing someone else, like, why do we devalue our lives so much? And how can that
Mm.
be, linked to past experiences? So, I mean, her work is phenomenal, and there's obviously lots of people who have, written after her work, but I find her work as like, really groundbreaking and, really interesting
Yeah.
lens. Mm.
Do you think that we carry this in the body? Do you think that it's passed along from behaviors from our parents? Is it a bit of both?
Yeah, so there's definitely research to show that, um, there's an epigenetic part of this, and it's carried in the body. And yeah, and then I think also is like the learned stuff as well. Like when I was talking to my dad once, my dad was saying to me like, um he was raised up until a certain point with his grandma, and his grandma was raised with her grandma, and all her grandma would talk about was slavery. So everything that they had, it would be like, and he said, you know, his grandma gave him like 100 things of like what to avoid, as if they
Mm.
were still really back in the 1800s, because she was like, make sure you don't look at anyone in their eye, make sure you work
Mhm.
hard and do this, make sure you do. So some of that is voiced, some of it is unvoiced. um yeah, and some of it is learn. And yeah, and some of it, I believe, does reside in the body. Like there are some things that um your body may just react to, and you're not really sure why.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. It recognizes something that maybe your brain hasn't yet named.
exactly.
That is wow, that's fascinating. And it's also kind of the knock-on effect, and some of the work that I'm doing for a client now is around this, and I notice it in my own life sometimes too, is like, what does it mean for our executive functioning, our bandwidth to think
Mhm.
into the future, to be strategic when there's this constant lack of safety in the body,
Yeah,
in the way
yeah,
that we've been told to just protect ourselves. 95% of your energy and your resources is going into safety. So where does the building even happen? Where does it come in? And then how do we make that different for our kids?
yeah. I mean, that's a that is such a big question. There is such a thing about safety, and and just emotional safety. When I think back to like when I was working, and very rarely were we thinking about people's emotional safety, because there was so much physical lack of safety around them. Like I'd be working with young people, and in the area of London that I was working in, there was lots of knife crime. So we're like just really focused on keeping them alive. Um, and then you think, I'm working with a 14-year-old boy, like you're just focused on safety, and you can't go to this area, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. But you're like, how do you feel? How does it feel to hear at 14 that three of your friends have been murdered, or all of that? And then how do you then, you have the social worker sitting in front of you saying, well, what do you want to do with your life? And they're probably like, "Are you crazy? What are you talking about? What do I want to do with my life? I want to, I'm trying to stay alive, or I'm trying to work out how I'm going to pay this money, or how I'm going to." And so it's like you will see people, you never really know. And I mean that really can be more of an extreme example, but you know, I think to myself, so when I was in the UK, when I entered into the workplace, just before that, my mum had passed away. And so I had the knowledge of, I need to ensure that I'm always making enough money to be able to, pay rent or a mortgage, that, or I'll be homeless, because we no longer have a family home. And so that level of like always being aware of that meant that I didn't, have opportunities to take certain risks that other people could have. So when people would say to me, well, what do you want to do next? I'm thinking about what's next in this career. Like, and I'm not going to be like, oh, actually what I want to do is art. I just want to be an
Mm-mm.
artist, like I can't really think of it, because I'm thinking of, okay, I need this amount of money in order to ensure that I'm able to live the kind of life that I want to live, and also not be homeless, and also all of these other things. And so, um, whereas I mean, this hasn't really been my experience, but like other people that I know, like when my mum was alive, I just came out and took a year in Tanzania,
Mm.
just because to find myself. Some, a lot of people don't have that opportunity to have that, to really kind of know, what is it, you know, not even what you want to do, but what are the possibilities in your life, because you're so busy trying to work out how you kind of survive an interaction with someone who has a lot more money than you, and you feel, you know, the power dynamics. And so you're not really thinking. They ask you a question, but your central nervous system is all over the place, so you can't even really focus on what they say, you know. um yeah, so yeah, so
I like that you said central nervous system, because this conversation, it's giving me this, like, I don't know, this, like, kind of sadness that's, like, warm in my stomach, and, like, a little bit of an ache in my back, because I just feel so I feel so heavy for what we have to carry. I mean, to different degrees, but what we all have to carry, or I mean, do we have to? It it just feels insurmountable, and maybe that's not true. I mean, have you have you seen a way out? Can you paint a way out without family to support you, or family that's just trying to keep you safe the best way they know how? So they're not really thinking about possibility for you. How do you get out of that?
yeah, I mean, you know, I don't have the answer to that question, but you asked the question before that, which I think is really important, which is, do we have to carry this? And a large part of how I've been living my life for, you know, the last couple of years is being like, I'm withdrawing. You know, before this, you know, I was very much to social justice, and you know, and all of the activism that comes with this. And you know, I was working with, you know, lots of people who are in crisis, and you know, also in my spare time, I mean, I still do this, but in my spare time, doing a lot of community work, and you know, working with parents who might have their children in the criminal justice system, or just facing other really hard experiences, and you know, and just being there. And then I realized that actually I'm also drowning, and we're all just drowning
Mm,
together. So where we can, how do we withdraw? And in the spaces where you know, I don't have to be in, you know, in all of these activities. And so I think there's a question to ask: do I, you know, I'm not God, so I don't have to be everywhere. I don't have to be in every struggle that, you know, people are experiencing. And I also think that by being in every struggle, especially as someone who's come from, you know, some marginalized communities, um, actually, I'm not even the right person to be in all of those struggles, because
mm,
I don't have the resource that other people have. And it's making us exhausted and tired. And we deserve rest. We deserve joy. We deserve fun. We deserve to, you know, enjoy our families. And that was a large part of why I decided, you know, I just want to be with my children. I want to
mm,
be home with my children. And I know that I don't have um, the same emotional capacity as someone who may have had, you know, a little bit of a rosier life, although we all have challenges. So I'm not saying no one's life is completely rosy. And if it is, you know, amen to them. That's where I'm trying to get to, you know. But I owe it to myself, and to my children, because I have the opportunity to do that, to say, all right, my emotional capacity is not as large. So I'm actually going to be at home more, so that I don't have the stresses of this, or the stresses of like trying to, you know, fight this injustice. I don't even watch the news, no better. Like sometimes people will tell me
mm,
stuff about what goes on and what's happened, and I have no idea. And they're like, how have you missed that? Because I don't have the emotional capacity to carry every single, you know, terrible thing that happens in the world, and be in a really stuck place. And when I do, I come back in, and you know, connect with my community. But I don't always have the space to do that. And so I think the other question you asked around, you know, do we always have to carry that? My thing is like, no, because who is giving it to us? You know, like,
mm,
and why, and for what, you know, for what purpose? You know, I don't resonate with being a strong black woman. I'm not, you know, like, and that's okay as well, you know, like, so just, yeah, being aware of what you are able to carry, and you you don't have to carry anything if you know within reason. Sorry, not completely. If you have children and they're dependent, they're dependents. There is a bit of carrying that you have to do, but in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the shoulds are just social constructs.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to someone else for this podcast. I think it was Carolyn, and she said one of the things that she would tell herself, her younger self, 10 years ago self, is no one is coming. And
Yeah.
it's up to you to build that emotional safety for yourself, to decide for yourself what's yours to do, to make that
Yes.
blueprint for your life, because no one is coming to rescue you and do that for you. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that I'm enjoying about kind of mid 30s and going into like, eventually I'll be in my 40s and 50s, is really I have fully accepted that this is my life to take ownership of and to
Yes.
live. I'm not putting it on anyone else anymore to
Yeah.
to give me that joy and that safety.
Yes. Uh, and I love that. I remember one time I went into a church when I was a new believer, and the preacher said something like, once you're past the age of 18, or it wasn't 18, maybe he did put a age, but he was like, if you're an adult, the life you have is the life that you've created. And I was like, oh
Mm.
my gosh, that's deep. Considering that I work in such a field where people have experienced such terrible things in their lives. And it didn't sit well with me. And I wrestled with it for a long time. And I was like, but there is a point where we have maybe not all control, but some control over the experiences we have. Um, and yeah, and as I say, it's some, but we should take it. In your in the day-to-day life, you have to work it out. You work it out and you heal and you do the things for you. You have to show up for yourself.
Yes, you have to show up for yourself. Okay, so you mentioned that now you're spending time with your children and you are doing what's yours to do, not trying to save the entire planet and like generations before us, but doing what's yours to do. Was there a moment in motherhood when you realized you're a different person than before?
I would say this is what motherhood has done and how it's changed me the most. It has helped me to live a life according to my values. So even in
Mm,
terms of my faith, like before my children were born, I had a form of faith. Um, and after the boys were born, I had to think, all right, because my own mum died unexpectedly, I have to think, okay, what would life be like for the boys if I just dropped down dead tomorrow, right? What would I
mm.
need them to have or know or be, all of those things. And I was like, I really want them to have peace in their faith, understanding that, it's going to be okay. So that meant that our decisions were very different. Like they just only started going to a preschool like 3 weeks ago and they're three already. So, like all of those things were delayed because we were going to like a little Bible study around the corner and, and I started doing Sabbath and, so all of those things, I mean, it's not a perfect walk, but it's just been more like, what is it that I actually care about? What is it, the things that I value most? What is it that the children, I want them to see and know and understand that if I was to die, what would they say mum's values were? And so, yeah, and then, rejig my life like that. And I think in my former life, I I wasn't always value based. Like there were, you know, other things sometimes, things that glittered that made me think, yeah, yeah, let's do that, because it was all sparkly and stuff like that. I have a better ability not to jump at everything that's silly. Not all the things. Sometimes I jump, but I mean some of the things I'm like, no.
Yeah. It sounds like these boundaries are, as opposed to being restrictive, they're actually creating more ease and more openness and comfort. And I do love all of what you've said. And I think about when I know I've made the right decision, it's like this was difficult to make, but afterwards it just feels so peaceful. And designing for the future for your kids, really thinking about what legacy you want to leave from now. I find that, yeah, I need to practice that with my daughter as well. Like the way that I want us to treat each other when she's an adult, in terms of like just like listening and prioritizing each other's needs and showing up for each other. I think there's versions of that that need to happen right now that I'm trying to practice. So that, I love how you put that. And so I guess I have one last question for you. Is there a myth about motherhood, like what you expected versus what it is, that you think needs to be redefined?
Something that I may have carried that I realize is completely not true for me, um, is that um, it will get easier.
Mm.
Like motherhood gets easier as the children get older. Because for me, I've had the absolute reverse. Like when the boys came, I was just so full of joy, and just everything was just, everyone was like, oh, it's so difficult, you have two, they're all breastfeeding, and I just really enjoyed all of that. But I think so I think I held that, I'm just gonna keep getting, you know better and better. And then we just had a complete 360 at 2.5 years old. I just found it complete so difficult. And I know people talk about the terrible twos or whatever, and it wasn't even that. I just found everything hard. I was like overwhelmed, hot, touched out, sensory overloaded, all of the things, potty training. I found, another, oh, now we adding smell to all of the, sensories that are going. And I just found it really, yeah, just really difficult. And I think I said to you, I put on a lot of weight as well. Like, so I hadn't really put on any weight after pregnancy, and then I ballooned up at 2.5 years, mainly because of like, stopping breastfeeding and things like that. And I was like, whoa, I had no idea. And so I mean, most people will know this, and so it's not really a myth, but it really is a ride. I don't want to call it a roller coaster because that too has connotations, but it really is a ride, and it's not a linear ride. I think just to go into what I did at 2.5 years, I think, yeah, I think that's the myth I would say, is that it gets easier, or you get stronger. I don't even think I got stronger, if I'm being honest. Like, I think if anything, I got weaker, emotionally, physically, all the way. So yeah, I think for me in my journey, that for sure has definitely been a myth, because yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard and people don't tell you upfront. Not that it would change anything. Like I would still choose to be a mom, but I wish everyone were just more honest about it, because then there'd be more compassion. But it's hard. It is
I
hard.
think I think the reason why people aren't, I think people are not very receptive to when they hear mothers saying things that are not positive. Like I can just think of, like, when you say, oh, this is really hard, and then someone will say to you, well, enjoy this time because it goes by so quickly. It's like there's
Right.
almost a discomfort with people hearing a mother struggling. So I don't think that is on the part of mothers not being honest. I really think that is about what people have the capacity to hear. And so I think after a while, what happens is, because I say to people all the time, I'm like, I'm struggling with these boys, as much as it's joyous and all of that. And they'll just be like, oh, but we saw your picture the other day. And I'm like, no, I'm not, like, and then I realized, I'm like, oh no, they don't have the capacity to hear this. Like they don't have it to hear that, it's really, I'm finding potty training really, really hard. And, I'm finding, the children wanting to be on me every 5 seconds really difficult. That I find that the same way that I said, you're thinking about what comes up for you when you're talking to your partner. I feel like some people don't have the space to have that conversation and have those difficult things come up for them, and allow the other person to kind of speak and listen, because sometimes people are zoning out and all of that. So I don't actually think it's the mothers. Like the more I look at it, I'm like, I've heard that person say something, but the response to it has probably shut them down.
Mhm.
So that's just my little view about it.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And then it becomes who helps moms to carry it? Is it other
Mhm.
moms? Have you found that it's community that supports you in terms of other moms?
Yeah, for sure. It's all being community. Like all the before I was a parent in Tanzania, I didn't have any community here. And after I became a parent, I forced myself to be out because I was like, okay, come out of yourself now because I was like, I will, yeah, it will be very difficult for me if not for community. So I'm quite fortunate to have a few friends who have children who are exactly the same age as the boys, and now we've got some older people who speak into our lives and tell us different things. And so yeah, I think it is that I can be like, oh, this is really really difficult, and then I'll have someone who's like a postpartum doula be like, this is da, 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 and they can hold it, but and they have that space. So I do think it is a community, a village of, for me it's been other mums, because I realize that my partner doesn't have the space to carry it as well, because we're in the trenches together. So it's not like
Mm,
now I can sit down and therapeutically like be like, babes, I find it really difficult. I realize, okay, no, don't have it because you also are processing it in your own way. So it has been for me the other women and mothers around me that have helped me, and not just mothers, actually women. Yeah, women
mm,
who have
mhm.
helped me.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so grateful for other women. Thank you, Keish, for this conversation. I'm so grateful for you. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm also always looking for guests who enjoy meaningful conversations. If that sounds like you, please send me a message and let me know what you'd like to talk about. I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening.